So, what are your thoughts on marijuana reparations?
Uh, I think reparations are a very complicated process. Um, Let me say this first, though. I think it is a very solid idea on its premise. But I think in the case of Oakland, the execution hasn't been solid at all.
Hmm.
It's been the idea has gotten more attention than the actual process of bringing the idea to fruition. And at this point, what I think we're seeing is a lot of people's hopes being wrapped into this idea of reparations that doesn't have the foundation that's necessary to make sure that everyone who's bought into the idea is going to be successful in the cannabis business.
Okay. And what are some of the roadblocks that you've seen that you feel like this is what went off the rails?
Well, one of the primary roadblocks is money. Uh, the part of the plan is to build a fund for businesses that qualify as equity applicants, was to build a fund based on money that was taken from the taxes of businesses operating. But because the permitting system has been so gummed up by the equity program, Oakland isn't issuing permits at a rate that they thought they would be, and therefore the money is not coming in that they thought or as quickly as they had anticipated. And anyone who's starting a business, cannabis or otherwise, you need that seed funding or that startup money to get off the ground. I mean, you have um, costs associated with properties. You have costs associated with distributors. You have costs associated with hiring. And I found that a lot of equity businesses and even general businesses are having trouble finding that investment capital. And so there is a reliance on a city to provide that funding, because while Oakland will waive application fees for businesses, for some businesses, the state is not. The state doesn't have an equity program,
Mhm.
and so the state fees are rather exorbitant. I mean, you're talking about tens of thousands of dollars depending on what permits you are applying for, and that's a significant cost that many businesses don't have in their coffers.
So,
So
some of the funding part of it is something that I hadn't read about. That I was mainly had seen things about the permitting of allowing half the permit. So there was supposed to be a funding piece in place.
yes, it's called the Equity Assistance Program, and it was going to be funded by cannabis tax revenue. And once that cannabis tax revenue reached $3.4 million, then that money would be distributed to equity applicants, and then the city would open up all applications to all applicants. But I found that many general applicants who were willing or who had previously paid the city taxes but were ineligible for getting a permit, they're no longer paying the city taxes because they're no longer in operation.
Hmm.
They're illegal businesses in a sense. So that tax money that used to go to the city is now, I mean, it's disappeared, and now many businesses have gone underground, which is another, and that I'm reporting on is how the underground market is thriving right now in places like Oakland, San Leandro, Richmond, other cities in the East Bay.
Hmm. Okay. Um, so what has Oakland gotten right about marijuana reparations?
Just just the idea, like that is correct. I mean, it's the statistics show that certain neighborhoods in Oakland have had people are arrested disproportionately,
Hmm.
and studies also show that blacks and whites consume marijuana at roughly the same rates. But in Oakland, blacks have been arrested disproportionately more than whites. So just the basic idea that people who have been disproportionately affected by the war on drugs need to be able to benefit from this new legal system. And that is what Oakland got right. I have never disputed that. I think there needs to be this kind of equity program. But what my problem is that I don't think it was structured in a way to make sure that you're not disenfranchising already established businesses, or you're not um, basically telling someone they can't open up a business in Oakland. You're discriminating against business owners, and I don't think that's fair, particularly where some of these businesses wanted um, to participate in the equity program.
Do you think the equity program would have worked better if it was a state level program rather than a city level program?
I haven't thought of that, but I think it would have worked better if the state would also waive fees for equity applicants. Particularly, one thing I did like about Oakland, um, they want to make sure people who were arrested or incarcerated for cannabis related offenses were able to participate in this new economy. And I think if that was at the state level, yes, that would work. Because one thing I've noticed is that there's, in the application process for Oakland, there is no structural backbone for people who want to start in the business. There's just this, you have to have, what about business plans? What about how are you going to fund your business? But I think if the state had been involved, Shannon, at that level, it would have, we'd still be trying to figure out what equity meant. So Oakland got to jump on that. This is what equity means to us. But what Oakland didn't get right is this is how we're going to structure it so that we can ensure equity exists. And right now, what we have is equity businesses in Oakland struggling to get off the ground, just to get space, struggling to get off the ground, while businesses that have already existed and are incubating equity applicants are being allowed to thrive.
Okay. And so is the biggest, with funding, you've mentioned the fees quite a bit. So is the fees a bigger hurdle or raising capital for the actual business?
Well, they're both equally problematic because, it takes a lot of bandwidth to do either. But I think the fees go hand in hand with the capital because you have to raise money to be able to operate a cannabis business. We're talking about if you want to get into the cultivation side, you're talking about hundreds of $1,000s probably of equipment just to be able to compete with someone who's already established.
Right.
And what the city had scripted 1,000 square feet. If a general applicant incubated an equity applicant, that general applicant had to provide at least 1,000 square feet of space for that equity applicant to operate. 1,000 square feet is nothing when you have warehouses in Oakland running 20,000 square feet of operation space. And so it's very difficult for the equity applicant to exist in this market where businesses are failing and the competition is just chewing up all these businesses because not only do you have to present a product, you have to get that product to a distributor, and then it has to be put on shelves in front of the consumers. Well, if you're not in that pipeline, then there's no reason for the dispensary owner to put you on their shelves. So we're talking about, Shannon, we're talking about packaging, we're talking about marketing, we're talking about so much more than just an application. And I think that's where Oakland stopped at was, hey, you get an application, you get your permit from the city, but how are you going to pay your state fees? We don't know. How are you going to pay just to open up your business, have that where you're going to get that startup cash? that's left up to you. And I think Oakland should have had um, an office so it would could handhold applicants um, who needed more than just a permit. They needed someone to actually go through the process with them and help them actually establish the business.
Hmm. So what about like partnerships? I've heard of Oakland has the Hood Incubator. Was there any consideration given to partnering with groups like that, or even partnering with existing businesses?
Well, yes, and I think the city's been slow to do that. I mean, that should have been established before this was voted on in council. I mean, that should have been part of the vote, not just this is what we want to do, but how are we going to do this? So, so yes, the city is now moving slowly to establish um, these partnerships with groups whose only investment is um, ensuring success of these businesses. But that's something relatively new. That wasn't at the outset,
Mhm.
a year and a half ago when this really became an issue, a contentious issue in the city.
How much of a difference do you think that would have made if they had begun with that step, included more partnerships?
Oh, I mean, it would have made all the difference because, you would have an established organization that would be there to help to answer any service questions that might come up. Um, and I think that um, it would have allowed the city to have someone to push back against some of the amendments that were being proposed. It would have been immediate pushback saying, "Hey, that's not going to help the people that you're trying to help." Um, but that was these things are only being thought of after the fact, and that's because the idea was so good that almost too good to be true, and it turns out that that's really the case. But I want to make clear that I do support the idea of equity. I
Mhm.
just think there needed to be a more sound structure to achieving that equity.
So then, going straight into what do you think state and local governments can learn from Oakland's experience? What do you think they should take away from what you've seen?
Well, they should take away number one that there is a need for this kind of programming. That's number one. I think cities and states can learn um, that they should start acknowledging that black and brown people were disproportionately affected by the war on drugs. They were targeted by the war on drugs. That's number two. And number three, I think there is support in the community for this type of programming, and it's just a matter of building it in a way that it would ensure the success of the applicants. Because, as you know, most businesses fail in the first 2 years, and I don't see any structure that's set up that's ensuring these businesses will at least get an opportunity to compete. It's a significant uphill battle that I see right now, particularly with funding. And I think cities and states should really consider funding these businesses. And if you're taking it from cannabis tax revenue, we're talking about a multi-billion-dollar industry. The money is available
Mhm.
for that kind of funding. But if it's you just can't make an amendment or make a law or say words. You have to back it up with actual dollars for these applicants.
Okay. So do you feel like the what you're speaking about, the funding model combined with the equity permitting process is the best model for other states or cities to replicate? Or do you think there are other models that would be more successful?
I can't speak to other models that would be more successful. I can only speak to what I've reported on here in Oakland, and I think Oakland model would be more sound if funding was at the top of the list,
Mm,
not so much just you get in the front of the line for permitting, but yeah, if you're in the front of the line for permitting, you also have access to these dollars immediately to
mm,
start your business.
okay. And so a lot of your reporting has been critical of Desley Brooks.
Hmm.
And one thing you've noted is that she has not been willing to answer questions. So if you were able to ask her questions, what questions would you want to ask her right now?
I'd like to ask her. I'd like to ask Desley Brooks right now is what's taking so long for Oakland to distribute permits, because we're running up against the deadline for the state to have local permits so the state can issue permanent permits. I'd also like to ask Ms. Brooks, why were there so many roadblocks put up during making the cannabis legislation in Oakland? And why were they at last minute? Like, for one, there was a residency roadblock slipped in at the last minute, and some people wanted to challenge that for legality, saying you can't make a requirement for a business that's discriminatory, residency requirement for a business. I think I'd also want to ask Ms. Brooks how many businesses did she think could be successful in the current climate? Like, how and what businesses she was aware of that have a roadmap to success. Not just a roadmap to just opening a business, but roadmap to success.
Okay. And regarding the residency requirements, would you be in favor of that just earlier in the process, or do you think those are too discriminatory?
No, I'm not in favor of that. I think it should just be an open market. And I think that it should be an open, and you're already reserving, when you had the 1-to-1 ratio, one general applicant, one equity applicant, you're already making it at least fair, one in, one in, or 1-to-1 ratio, that's fair. But when you tell people who don't live in Oakland for 10 years that they can't open a business in Oakland, particularly people who had already been operating a business in Oakland, that is not fair. So you're basically telling a small business owner that even though they've been paying taxes to Oakland for X amount of years, that now that it's legal, you can no longer operate in this space. And I think that is really unfair.
So
Because
sorry,
no,
please. I thought you were done.
no, so you're talking about businesses that have hired employees and they're having to lay off employees. So you're costing people jobs, not just the business owners, but their employees. You're costing them jobs because of the equity requirement, when there are businesses who wanted to participate in that process and now they're not able to, and they're not even allowed to own a business in Oakland.
So the residency requirement is for all the permits, not just the equity permits?
No, so it is for the equity, but general applicants get dinged if they don't have the residency requirement. You lose points on your application if you don't have the residency requirement.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's a point system. And
Okay.
if you don't, residency, I forget what the exact, so I can't be quoted on that. I think it's something like 30% of your point total. And if you don't have that residency, then you're going to the back of the line.
Okay. But what if they split the residency and made it only apply to the equity applicants?
That would make sense in the long run, particularly for businesses who, come up with plans that they want to hire, 75% local, 75% from Oakland. I've talked to several business owners who wanted to do just that. Now, is that going to happen? I don't know, because not many businesses can hold on until the next round of permits are issued.
Okay.
Because you got to understand, some people are paying, tens of thousands of dollars a month on space right now, and they have no business operating in that space.
Right.
That's hard to sustain.
Okay. All right. I have one more question for you, and then I'll let you go.
Mm-hmm.
What are things that you would recommend or like to see Oakland do going forward to get Oakland back on track with this program?
Sure. I would like to see in the next round of permits, the process, I would like to see Oakland define what it will do to support the businesses from day one. Once you process your application, these are the resources that are available to you. You don't have to make any calls about it. Here is a sheet, or here is a website, or here is someone you can speak to immediately who can answer your questions. I would also like Oakland to continue holding the flag for equity. Again, I can't stress enough, Shannon, that is what is necessary here. That idea is a wonderful idea. But I would just like Oakland to take a look at how this process is unfolded and actually give an honest accounting of what can be done better. And I think initially what should be done better is better resources for the people who are starting out, because now that we're so far into the process, the people that have money, I'm talking about the general applicants who can incubate, 6 to 8 equity applicants, have a head start, and those equity applicants aren't even starting their businesses yet. And I think that's a detriment to the idea. I mean, it basically undermines what Oakland is trying to do.